Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Steele, and I'm the Government Affairs Manager for ABC Western Washington. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Chuck, it's Ziegert.
Close enough.
Tried hard on that one. He's with the Office of Labor and Industries, and he's going to be giving a presentation this morning on prevailing wage and some of the changes that have occurred. So Chuck, I'll leave it up to you, and thank you so much for being with us this morning as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophia, for inviting us. Glad to get out and do these. Do our part to help educate contractors, understand what prevailing wage is and everything. Now, like you said, I'm Chuck Ziegert. I'm with the Prevailing Wage Program, Department of Labor and Industries. Been in the program since 2012. Worked my way from forms processing up through the more technical side of it, the industrial relations agent side, and worked my way up to the top of that heap, I guess. So I'm fairly familiar with the program. As we're going through this, if you do have questions, please raise your hand and we'll try to get to you, or you can put the questions in the chat box and we'll see them there, and I'll try to answer them as we go along. If there's some that I miss or whatever, then we're going to take a break at about the halfway point, and I'll certainly review the questions then, and when we come back, we can take care of any questions you might have. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started here. And this does look like death by PowerPoint. It's a total of 93 slides. We do this for a reason. There's a lot of information on these slides and everything. A lot of information we're trying to give to you. The idea is, hey, this may not all apply today, but next week, scenario comes to you, and hey, I remember that guy last week said something about this, and you can use this PowerPoint presentation kind of as a reference manual. Go back to there and see if there's something there related to that will help you out. So that's kind of the reason why we have this built the way it is. So okay, let's get started here. Okay, this is a presentation on the Washington State Prevailing Wage Law. We live and die by Chapter 3912 RCW and Chapter 296127 of Washington Administrative Code. There is also a federal prevailing wage law that's called the Davis-Bacon Act. So two programs, one federal, one state. We'll cover some of the differences here in just a minute. And these laws do apply to publicly funded contracts for trades work. So tax dollars being used, an organization that runs, on taxes, tax revenue, be it, the state agency, city, county, fire district, any one that operates on public funds, likely going to trigger prevailing wage provisions for us. Like I said, the two laws, the Davis-Bacon and the state program, a few similarities and also some differences to that. Overtime is one of the differences. The federal program acknowledges the over 40 hours in a week overtime. The state makes it a little more exciting than that. We acknowledge over 40 in a week. We also have a daily overtime requirement. Work over 8 hours in a day generally will trigger overtime for a worker, no matter how many hours they've worked that week. There are also trade-specific overtime codes that you'll need to look at. Each trade, where you go to look up the wage rates, you'll see a little box that says OT, has an alphanumeric code in there. You click on that, and a little dialog box will open. They'll tell you what the specific overtime rules are for that trade. Paperwork, also differences in that. The state requires two forms from contractors: the statement of intent to pay prevailing wages and the affidavit of wages paid form. And now, since January 1st of 2020, very similar to the federal program, we also require the submission of weekly certified payroll records, no less than once per month. So a fairly new requirement, but very important requirement for us. One of the places that we differ from the federal program is off-site work. Offsite work for the state generally covered by us if it is contemplated by the contract. Federal program, looks at work just pretty much just inside the fence on the job site. State program, much broader in scope. Zone pay, that is also a federal thing. The state program, the wage rates are set by county. So anywhere in the county that work is being done, we have the published wage rate for that. Federal program, they set a wage rate for the highest city or the largest city in the county. And then there's concentric bands or zones out from there of different pay that is applicable to the worker. But the state program sets the wage rates by the county. Okay, well, what happens if you run into that program or that contract where there's state and federal laws apply? Not your lucky day. Don't go out and buy a lottery ticket. You have to comply with both sets of regulations on that and do whatever papers are required for both of those. Right, well, what is this public work? You'll see various definitions of it throughout our law booklet. One that we commonly use is RCW 39.04.011 subsection 4. It's public work, construction, alteration, repair, improvement, other than ordinary maintenance executed at the cost of a state or any municipality. That cost to a public agency is one of the big triggers that will get you into prevailing wage work. Our WAC 296.127.010 subsection A 7A goes on to expound on that a little bit more. It includes construction, alteration, enlargement, improvement, repair, demolition, executed by contract, executed at that cost is going to trigger prevailing wage. Funding source does not necessarily apply. Where the funds come from. We've got a court case that that told us that the funding source is not a deciding factor necessarily in this. Or the subsection 3 there, all work, construction, other ordinary maintenance performed by a third party. That we commonly refer to that as turnkey law. The building that prevailing wage program is currently in Tumwater, privately built office building and occupied by a state agency. If your project is to, say, replace the carpet in our office, more than 50% of that project space occupied by a public agency, that's going to be a public works project. This is a Worker Protection Act, so we do also cover the janitorial building service maintenance contracts. Another fairly vulnerable population of workers. So we do cover those type of contracts also are covered in the prevailing wage program. In fabrication, manufacture, non-standard items, we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. Okay, we talked about ordinary maintenance. What is ordinary maintenance? Well, the courts actually answered this for us. It was a court case. This was City of Spokane versus Department of Labor and Industries. And what they were doing was City of Spokane had built a facility, burns trash, generates electricity. Great green Washington idea. Get rid of something we don't use, create electricity. Because of the quality of fuel used in this facility, they have to shut it down regularly, go in there, remove the items that didn't burn, clean up the burners, keep the facility running at an acceptable rate of efficiency. And so they knew they had to do this regularly, so they called it ordinary maintenance. Something we have to do fairly regularly scheduled. So they didn't pay prevailing wage for that. And this went up and down through the court system, and courts finally came back and gave us the definition of ordinary maintenance. Said it's maintenance by contract, covered work. Maintenance is ordinary under the statute when it's performed by in-house employees of the public entity. So if it's a maintenance by contract, it's going to be covered work for us. A good example of this also is Seattle Public Schools. They have carpenters, electricians, plumbers on their staff. There's a leaking sink in a classroom. They call their facilities management. One of their plumbers is available, goes out, fixes that sink. Not a public works project. It's done by one of their own employees. Same scenario, leaking sink. All their plumbers are busy. They call Joe's Plumbing. Joe sends a worker out to replace or to fix that sink. That's going to be covered work. That's now maintenance by contract. Other takeaway from this slide is there is no minimum dollar threshold amount for the state prevailing wage program. Federal program, there's a $2,000 threshold before any of their provisions kick in. The state, no minimum threshold amount. So theoretically, a penny, public funds, covered work for our purposes. Okay, how do we figure out this whole prevailing wage thing? Well, we've got it in the rule, all determinations, prevailing wage rate made by my boss, the industrial statistician. So we have that, that in RCW there. And, we look at the RCWs, we look at the law, we look at the rules, the WACs, and then we also look at case law. Said, we've got, this is a fairly complex program, small in the grand scheme of things, but fairly complex laws. So we really look at what the legislature, what guidance we've received from the legislature, how the agency has chose to enforce that through the adoption of the Washington Administrative Code. And then the courts have told us, have given us really good guidance. The previous example, courts told us what ordinary maintenance was. At the end of this presentation, we'll cover some of those more important court cases that have shaped where we are today. Okay, what is this whole prevailing wage thing? Well, hourly rate, well, this is 3 parts. Hourly rate of wage, usual benefits, and the overtime. We have to have those 3 components in there. Paid in the locality. It's the largest city in the county. It's again our wage rate set by county. And it's that majority of laborers, workers, mechanics. Hands-on type trades is what we're going to cover. Those power equipment mechanics, carpenters, laborers, electricians, plumbers, hands-on type trades is what we're looking at. We do cover some design work, things that's done by surveyors. Office support staff, not covered for us generally. So it is more of the hands-on type trades is that we're looking to cover here. And we do have the scope of work descriptions. It's basically the job description for each of those trades. And those are called out in the Washington Administrative Code, in the WAC 296-127 013 series. We have about 65 trades out there. In the scope of work descriptions, they will tell us what that trade can do. And that's what we look at when we get in a question asking, hey, what classification does this worker fall into? We ask for the tools, equipment, process being used. Look at that, look at our scope of work descriptions and see where the best fit is in there. It's not always a super good fit, but this is what we have to work with, these 65 classifications. So we really try to get, in-depth feel for what is happening, what tasks are being done, and how we can fit that into one of our scope of work descriptions. And it is, the courts have told us too, it is the type and nature of the work that's being done. It's not the title of the person, it is the tasks being done That's why we ask those specific questions. What are they doing at that time? And our prevailing rates of pay published by the trade and occupation, the county the work's being done in, and then the effective date. And we'll cover what effective date means here in just a moment. Okay, locality. When you hear that word, think of county. It is, once again, our wage rates are set by county. So it is the county that the work is being done in. If you have a project in King County, but your shop is in Pierce County, and you're fabricating something for that project at your shop in Pierce County, the fabrication can be done at the Pierce County rate. The transport of that specially made item to the project in King County is done at the King County rate, and then the installation of that item is at the King County rate. So it is the county where the work, well, the actual work site where the work is being done is locality. Okay, overtime, touched on that a little bit earlier. 3 types of overtime for the state. There's the weekly, there's standard over 40 hours in a week. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. Then there's also a daily overtime requirement for the state. This has been in law for quite some time. It goes back to, I think, 1894, actually, where they set the daily overtime. So any hours worked on a public works project over 8 hours in a day will trigger prevailing wage regardless of how many hours that individuals worked that week. The exception to that is the 410 agreements. It's often included in language in the collective bargaining agreements. If it is, then that covers the workers. If it's a non-union shop, then the employer can enter into an agreement with each worker where that worker is voluntarily giving up the 2 hours of overtime they would be due each day for having that 5th day off work. So if they have the 410 agreement in place, once they reach over 10 hours in that day, then it would still trigger prevailing wage or overtime provisions. So we see it a lot. Construction going on, cuts down on your startup shutdown time to have those workers work the 10 hours a day versus the normal 5/8. But when you're going to bid on a project, you have to be aware of those overtime provisions. Is the prime contractor planning on you working 410s? You need to know that. If you don't already have those agreements in place, you need to get them in place to avoid that daily overtime requirement. Also have to check that trade specific overtime code we talked about a little earlier. You go to our wage lookup page, be a box that says OT, alphanumeric code in there, click on that, opens up a dialog box that tells you what the trade specific overtime code is. Truck drivers is a good example. Most road construction projects, street improvement projects, the warning agency may want those done after hours, evenings, weekends, to mitigate traffic congestion. The truck driver overtime code often says that any work after 5 p.m. or work Saturday, Sunday is overtime, regardless of hours worked. So that may dramatically affect your personnel cost for that project. So make sure you're looking at those overtime codes. We also have a box there that says holiday. Once again, alphanumeric code in there. Click on that box and it'll tell you what holidays are recognized by that trade. There's some that have no holidays recognized, like the building service employees. And then there's other ones that have, I believe it's up to 9 holidays acknowledged. If the worker performs covered work on those days, there's going to be something in the overtime code that talks about that also. And these codes do vary by trade, occupation, and county. So yeah, you've got to do a little bit of research there. Check out all the trades that you plan on using in that project. And, you know, changes by county. So, you know, be sure you're well aware of the overtime. That is one of the big things that we see, and when we do investigations, we do see a lot of overtime violations. So, you know, please, if not already, you know, bone up on the knowledge on overtime. It's something we look for when we do investigations. Okay, talked a little bit earlier about those scope of work descriptions. It is what the worker is doing. It is that type in nature, not the title of the job. Said we do have 65 scope of work descriptions out there. Many of them, especially like the telecommunication technician, electronic technician, those were written 20 years ago. Has any of those trades changed in the last 20 years? You know, just a little bit. Unfortunately, the scope of work descriptions haven't changed. So that's why we ask for that, you know, the detail, that tools, equipment, process. What type of system is this? Are you working on? That's going to help us take that information, do a deep dive into these scope of work descriptions, and find a fit in there for those. And once again, my boss, Industrial Statistician, is the one that makes those determinations. So yeah, we do have actually our team has a meeting every week where there's usually a scope of work question that comes up. You know, hey, with this fact set of what that person did, you know, where's the best fit in here? You know, sometimes it can fall under multiple trades. We see that with sheet metal installation. It can fall under sheet metal worker, carpenter, roofer in certain cases. So, you know, we look at where it may fall in that process. Good story on this one too is every summer we get question comes in, they're out doing a road construction project, have to replace a culvert that's right beside a creek. To do that, build a cofferdam in the stream, take the water out of there, so the dry area, so they can replace the culvert. But once that cofferdam is built, somebody has to go in there and catch all the little fishies and put them back in the stream. You know, ask tools, equipment, process, you know, looked at our scope of work descriptions to see where does that fit best. A fisheries biologist with master's degree gets really mad at us when we call them general laborers. But we don't have a fisheries biologist as one of our trades. So we, you know, take a look at what they did, you know, where does it fit? Our general laborer is kind of our, you know, our catch-all if we don't have anything specific. But, you know, it's not the title of that person that counts. It is the task they're doing. And that was the best fit we could come up with for that particular activity. Okay, once again, laborers, workers, mechanics, those covered trades must be paid not less than that prevailing rate of wage. It's not negotiable. You can't, oh, you know, we won't pay you that prevailing wage this week, but you know, maybe next week. Nope, don't do that. It is right in the law. The worker must be paid not less than that. You can pay more than our published wage rate. You know, if you have, you know, two workers, one just started, one's been on the job for 20 years, you could pay the more experienced person more than the one that just started, but they have to be both paid not less than our prevailing wage rate. And once again, it is our boss, the industrial statistician, that does make all determinations of those wage rates. Okay, another reference here. It's 3912-020, prevailing wage required upon that public work. Anytime public funds being used, covered work for us. And it is that hourly wages paid to those laborers, workers, mechanics, hands-on type trades, on those public works projects, building service maintenance contracts, for any entity that's using public funds, that, be it a state agency, a city, county, fire district, anytime public funds are being used, going to trigger prevailing wage, and those workers are paid not less than that prevailing rate of wage for the hours worked in the trade that they're doing. So, Bill can be running a excavator in the morning. He's paid power equipment operator rates. Afternoon, he's digging a ditch with a shovel. Afternoon, he's general laborer. Whatever task they're doing, if you keep good time records, you can pay for that individual task that they're performing. If you don't keep good payroll records, then we're going to default to it being the higher of the wage rate due for the entire time. It's a Worker Protection Act. The courts have told us, look in favor of the worker. So it is beneficial to you to keep accurate time records of the tasks that individuals performing throughout the day. Okay, well, when does the law require this prevailing wage? Well, work upon the public work. So, construction, reconstruction, alteration, repair, maintenance, demolition, public funds being used for that, covered work for us. And it's that work performed by that, once again, the laborer, worker, mechanic, hands-on type trades is what we're looking at here. Performing publicly funded contracts. So we also do the building service maintenance, janitorial type contracts. This is the Worker Protection Act. Looking out for those more vulnerable workers, the building service maintenance, janitorial workers, those wage rates are usually at or near the state minimum wage. So we're also looking out for that population also to ensure that those wage rates go up as the state minimum wage goes up. Turnkey projects, talked a little bit about that earlier. It's a private construction, then occupied by a public agency. Like I said, the building that we're currently in, built by a private developer. Department of Labor and Industry got too big for our main building in Tumwater, moved us over to this other building. Good example of this also is a few years ago when the state owned the liquor stores. Those liquor stores would often be, one of 10 shops in a strip mall. If the project was to replace the carpet in that liquor store, more than 50% of that project space occupied by a public agency, prevailing wage provisions kick in for that. Same scenario, that state-owned liquor store in the strip mall, the owner's going to come in and re-roof the entire facility. Now, only 10% of that project space is occupied by a state agency, so prevailing wage does not apply. So 50% is our magic number in that scenario. Small works, that has a little bit different meaning to us than it does to awarding agencies. But the takeaway for here is that there is no minimum threshold amount for the state prevailing wage programs. Federal program, once again, $2,000 threshold. State, no minimum contract amount at all. Offsite work, specific to the public work, making a non-standard item specifically for that project, covered work for our purposes. That will trigger prevailing wage provisions. Okay, what is the applicable prevailing rate of wage then for this? Well, there's three components that we have to know before we can answer that question. We have to know the county in which the work was performed, that locality. What happens if you've got if you're working on a bridge, spans a river, one side of the river is one county, one side is the other county. You have to list both counties on your forms. Bridge on I-5 over the Nisqually River, that's Thurston County, Pierce County line. The guy, say, painting the bridge, he's got the paintbrush in his hand on one side of the bridge, maybe getting one rate, walks to the other side of the bridge, paints that, maybe a different rate because it's in a different county. Have to be aware of that and keep track of that. So you know the county the work is performed in. We need to know that trade and occupation classification. Some of our trades, only have a handful of subclassifications for the occupation. Some of them have quite a few. Laborers is a good one. King County, I think there's over 100 different subclassifications for laborer. A little bit different wages for some of them. So you have to get a good idea of what the trade is and then the subclassification for that. The other important piece of information you have to have is the effective date for that. We'll cover what that looks like here in just a minute. That's the 3 pieces of information you need: the county, the trade, and then an effective date. And we have our look up journey level wage rates page. Pretty simple to go to that site. It's going to let you select the counties where the work is done. You can select whatever counties you want. You can select them all, like multiple counties. Select the trade you want. Put in, there's a box there for the effective date. Punch in that effective date, hit get wages, and it's going to give you what wages were in effect at that date for that particular project. I think our wages go back to most of them go back to 1980, a few even before that. So if you're curious as to how the wages have progressed over the years, punch in an older date in there, and it'll bring up the information on what the wage rate was for that particular time period. We also have our apprentice wage rates listed there. At our journey level lookup page, there's a little button over on the side that you can click on. Will get you to the apprentice lookup page, or you can go directly to this link here also to find that. Okay, the effective date for prevailing wage. Said real important criteria we have to figure out what is the correct wage for these workers. Here we see in its WAC 296.127.011 subsection 3 and 4. Usually, the 80% rule is that the effective date is going to be the prime contractor's bid due date for the project. The exception is if the award date is more than 6 months later, then the award date becomes the effective date. That is why we ask for both those dates on our intent forms. We're looking to make sure that the correct effective date was used for the project. It's not too common that the award date goes more than 6 months later, but it does happen. And per our rule here, that would change the wage rate for that project. And the 6 month rule is in there because our wage rates are updated twice a year. So it's going to capture that next change to our wage rate if that award date is more than 6 months later. All right, and we will get into like work order contracts, that stuff here in just a minute. Other takeaway from this is bullet 4 on here. Wage rates remain in effect for the duration of the contract. A multi-year long project, whatever the effective date was for that contract, that is the wage that's paid throughout the length of the contract. You can pay more if you want to, but that is the wage rate that remains in effect for the entire length of that, that particular contract. Okay, here we'll get into, you've noticed lately we started asking for the contract type on our forms. Well, why did we do that? Wasn't something we came up with. We are actually been requested by the legislature to provide a report at the end of the year on you know, what type of contract types, or the amount, the quantity of contract types that were used throughout the state for public works construction. That's why we started asking that question. And one of those, that contract type should be communicated to you from the awarding agency. They're the ones that make that decision, you know, based upon their enabling statutes. They have, you know, various ways they can procure public work. So it's up to the awarding agency to, you know, communicate that to you on what method they used. And here we'll cover those choices. One is the bid build contracts, probably one that we see, you know, most commonly out there. For that one, we would use the prime contractor's bid due date, you know, unless that award date is, you know, more than 6 months later, then the award date would become the effective date. In this type of contract, you know, all work fully defined in the contract, no unspecified future work, and we would see one intent and one affidavit for this project. The intent and affidavit forms always come in a set. So if we see an intent, there's going to have to be an affidavit filed. Intent form filed, you know, once you're awarded the contract. Perfect world, you get that filled out, submitted to us, and approved before you start work on the project. Not a requirement in the law. That is the perfect world scenario for that. But the awarding agency cannot make a payment to you until that intent form is approved. And then once your project is totally complete, you're all done with the work you're going to do, then you come back and submit the affidavit of wages paid form. So they always come in a set. Okay, the small works roster and limited public works contracts. Small works roster, that's our projects under $50,000. Awarding agency chooses to use the small works roster process. For both of these types of contracting, once again, it's the prime contractor's bid due date with the exception of that award date. And once again, this all work fully defined, no unspecified future work, one intent for the contract, and then the affidavit for the project. Purchase service contracts, another type of contracting method they can use. You know, if this is done through the bid process, once again, prime contractor's bid due date, or the date of that quote, you know, or the exception for the award date. And if it's not issued pursuant to bids, then it's the date that contract was executed. So there's always going to be a bid due date to put in our form. You know, it may not exactly be a bid due date, but it is the date that the contract is executed if that type of method is being used. And once again, for these, one intent, one affidavit is what we would see. Okay, design build contracts awarded through the request for proposal process. It is that award date that is the effective date the contract was executed. You know, once again, intent should state the contract award date under both the bid due date and the award date fields. So the request for proposal, you're not going to have the bid due date and award date they're both going to be the exact same date. That's fine. And once again, one intent, one affidavit for these type of contracting method also. Job order contracts. Don't see a whole lot of these, but if this type of contracting method is used, then there's going to be an intent and affidavit for each work order done under that job order contract. A little bit different from the previous types of contracting methods we used. This one, maybe a single job order contract, but there's going to be separate work orders under that, and each work order is captured with an intent and affidavit. Okay, General Contractor Construction Manager, GCCM. We're seeing more and more of these type of contracts being issued. A little bit more complicated process on these. This is where the general contractor will come in very early in the process, works with the awarding agency through much of the design, what would normally be the design phase of the project. For this one, there are some very specific rules. At about the 90% completion point of the design phase, the general contractor and the awarding agency entered into negotiations for this maximum allowable contract cost, MAC. Once that has been negotiated, if it's been negotiated successfully, then the construction phase, basically, of this type of contract can happen. If that negotiation isn't successful, that prime can be replaced by someone else in this type of contracting method. And for this type of contracting method, there are two sets of intents and affidavits required. There are one set for that design phase, and then another set for that construction phase. So if you're using this type of contracting method, you have to be very careful in communicating to your subcontractors which intent form of yours that they're supposed to file under if you are the prime on this. If you're not the prime, if you're one of the subs, ask the questions, make sure that you're filing under the correct one. We see a lot of that happening where they get filed under the incorrect form, incorrect intent ID number. We can't fix that. You're going to have to refile again, get it under the correct one. So a lot more communication has to happen if they're using this type of contracting method. And design phase of this, oftentimes we do see covered work. That's why there's the two sets of forms required. And the way our system is set up, the prime has to file that first set for the design phase, even though there may not be work done during it. Where our system is set up for this type of contracting method, there's two sets of intent and affidavit forms. So have to be very careful if you're involved in this type of contracting method. Okay, on-call contracts. Hopefully you don't see very many of these as compared to a couple of years ago. This type of contracting method, not specifically authorized in state law, was used tremendously, was used a lot in the past here. This basically would be where, say City Hall calls up Joe's Electrical on January 1st and says, hey, anytime a light bulb burns out, can you come out and replace it? Joe says, sure. They just entered into a contract. So an intent is required. January 3rd, a light bulb blows out, call up, hey, light bulb burned out, come out and replace my light bulb. So Joe sends somebody out, replaces the light bulb. They just completed a project under this contract. So it requires an affidavit. January 6th, light bulb burns out. Hey, light bulb burned out, come out, replace. Comes out, there's another project under that contract. So we would see, one intent, multiple affidavits, and could get pretty pricey because there's a processing fee for each of those affidavits. It's an expensive way to get light bulbs changed. I said we did see a lot of this type of method being used, not specifically called out in law to be used. State Auditor's Office says, yeah, we don't know what to do with it, but just keep good records. That was their guidance on it. Luckily, these are going away because they've been replaced by unit priced contracts. This started out just being authorized for public utility districts, and now it's more a type of agencies have been included in it. It's port districts, cities, counties, water sewer districts, and the public transit agencies are now included in this. This is the same type of concept where they're entering into a contract for undefined future work. But the way these are set up, it's the intent for the contract and then a single affidavit at the end of that contract year capturing all of the work done during that contract. So same idea, kind of as the on-call, but just called out in law and simplified the process where it's just usually one intent, one affidavit. We don't see multiple affidavits anymore on this type of contracting process. Okay, emergency contracts. What happens when that water line breaks at 2 o'clock in the morning? Does the emergency come into work the next morning and put out requests for bids? With the due date of next week? No, the first person they get out of bed 2 o'clock in the morning that can do the project is going to get the contract for that. And there are certain criteria that have to be met to make it an emergency situation. But once that is declared, then that first contractor they get gets the contract. They are to communicate that, hey, this is a public works project. Come out, take care of the emergency, catch up with all the paperwork later on. And the bid due date and award date for this type of scenario would be that date when you get the phone call on these ones. And once again, generally in this, we see the one intent, file as soon as possible, and then the affidavit when the work is totally complete on these type of ones. Okay, once again, no minimum dollar threshold amount for us, $2,000 for the federal program, nothing at all for us. Small dollar contract amounts, we get that question a lot. Still covered work for us. We do have some of those alternate filing procedures, using those combined forms, if the award agency so chooses to use those for the small ones, but no minimum dollar threshold amount for us. I also get the question of, hey, what makes that contract? Well, it can be that 600-page legalese filled contract, or it can be that phone call, any meeting of the minds, an agreement to do work for a publicly funded agency is going to get us into entering into a contract for our purposes. So it doesn't take much. Okay, another question we get quite often here recently is grants. A city gives a $1 million grant to the YMCA to upgrade their facilities. Is the upgrade of that YMCA building going to be, or does that trigger prevailing wage? The answer is yes, it does. That is seen as a cost to the public agency. If they didn't issue that grant to that awarding or to that YMCA, they would have used that money for something else for the greater good of the citizens. So that is covered work for our purposes on that. And here we have the relevant laws and rules. Okay, another question we get a lot is, what about warranty work? You install that new furnace in City Hall, feel good about your equipment, installation process. Yeah, we'll give you a year warranty on that. I say, okay. That fall works fine. Shut it down over summer. Next fall they come in, hit the go button, nothing works. So they call you up, hey, you installed this furnace for us. Give us your warranty. It's not working. You need to come out and figure out why it's not working. So you go back out, you get it running. That is still considered part of that initial public works project. You're not gonna, the contract amount isn't going to increase or anything because it's, don't charge warranty, but your trade and occupations may change. Hours worked on the project definitely will change. So the way we look at this is it's part of that same project. So the effective date for that warranty call will still be the effective date as indicated on that original intent. And the correct process is to file a new affidavit capturing all of the work you did on the project. The initial installation, and then capturing this warranty call out. Said contract amount, won't change, but worker hours will change. Trade may change based upon whatever needed to be done under that warranty call. So that's the way we look at the warranty work. Emergency work, talked about that a couple of minutes ago there. Get the emergency dealt with and then catch up on the paperwork. The emergency is supposed to communicate to that prime contractor, hey, this is an emergency, come out, get it dealt with, catch up with the paperwork afterwards. There's nothing in the law that says when an intent has to be filed, no date parameters for that. The emergency can't pay you until the intent is filed. So it is beneficial to get that in as soon as possible after you get the get the emergency situation under control. But that type of scenario, yeah, go out, get the emergency taken care of, catch up with the paperwork later on. Nothing at all wrong with that process. Another question we get a lot is asked about is material delivery. Delivery material are sand, gravel, crushed rock, concrete, asphalt, similar materials is covered work for our purposes. It's one of the other differences between the state program and the federal program. Federal program generally doesn't cover this type of material delivery. They call it de minimis use. The state program does cover this. As with everything, there's exceptions. The exception to this one is the stockpile idea. If the material is put in one location, all loads are brought in, dumped at one place, where they have to be picked up and moved to the point of incorporation into the project, then they may meet this very narrow definition of stockpile, where prevailing wage would not be required. If the truck is coming out, dumping right where it's going to be used, yeah, definitely covered work. Pretty narrow exception here for this the stockpile rule. And here is that WAC in probably really small print, but it is called out in this WAC 296.127.018. And we will cover in the court cases why we had to revise this WAC to include all of this. Once again, covered work for our purposes, unless they meet that really narrow definition of the stockpile. All right, what about off-site work? I said earlier there, work contemplated by the contract, covered work for us, federal program, just the work inside the fence there. We should have a court case that told us this. This is Everett Concrete Products, fairly old case now, 1988, but still in effect, still provides good guidance for us. This Everett Concrete Products was making tunnel liner segments for I-90 Mount Baker area. And this was well before Big Bertha and the Seattle adventure. But very similar process. Everett Concrete Products was making these concrete tunnel liner segments that were going to be used in this project. They fit these tunnel liner segments into the hole that's been drilled, and that's eventually where the cars are going to be going through. And these tunnel liners were made to specifications for this project. And the court said, yeah, it is, prevailing wage is required. Courts told us it's manufacturer's standard items for sale general market, not required for us. And that's the difference. Is it a standard item, or is it something made specifically for this project? Courts also told us that our law is only for work within the state borders. We can't cover work done in Portland. We see a lot of Oregon contractors coming up, from Portland area into Washington. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, coming into the Spokane area. We don't cover work outside of the state borders. So if they fabricated something in their shop in Portland, we can't dictate a wage rate for that. The transportation of that item up to your public works site, yes, that will cover, and the installation of it, of course, but we can't reach outside the state borders. In upper right corner here, you can see a picture that they sent us. Said, hey, we're making a ton of these things. I've got a whole field full of them here. It's a standard item. We're making a bunch of them. But the courts looked at it and says, no, these are made specifically for this project. Certain dimensions of these tunnel liner segments, tensile strength of the concrete, mating surfaces, designed just so to, fit this exact diameter that they're trying to make. Not something you'd want for a lawn ornament, not something for sale in a general market. It is made specifically for this project. So then that begs the question, well, okay, what is standard and what isn't? What is a standard item? What is a non-standard item? And our friends at Prevailing Wage Advisory Committee and WSDOT got together and came up with a checklist that can be used to kind of help answer that question. And we have the link down here also for that, where the checklist can be found. And it does live on the WSDOT's site. And here, once again, in really small print, is that checklist. And if you have a question on something like that, use this checklist, run through this. It'll help answer that question for you. Is the item fabricated for a public works project? Yes, it is. Okay, so we go to question 2. Is the item fabricated on the public works job site? If it is, yeah, covered work because it's done on the job site. If it's not, then we go to question 3. Is the item fabricated in an assembly plant set up for the public works project? If it is, yeah, covered work. If not, then we go to question 4. Okay. Does the item require assembly, cutting, modification of that item? Is it standard lengths of rebar you're getting in, and then cutting, bending, tying a rebar, that kind of thing. Okay, if it doesn't, then it is not covered. It's, you know, it's that standard type item. If it has to be modified by some method, yeah, okay, then we go to question 5. Is this prefabricated item intended for the public works? You know, typically an inventory item sold in the general market. You know, if not, covered work. Once again, is it something readily available out there? 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. Yep, you know, standard item, readily available. For your particular project, you need a 5x10 sheet of plywood. Yeah, it can be made easily, but not something readily available, open market. So yep, covered work for us. And question 6 here, does the specific prefabricated item, you know, generally defined as standard, does it have unusual characteristics, shape, type of material, that kind of thing? Once again, the rebar comes in standard lengths, but if you need different lengths of that, you know, it's gonna make a difference. Any modification of a standard item going to be covered work for us. So if you have any questions like that, you know, run through this this checklist. If you still have questions, you know, feel free to contact us, and we can help you out with that also. Okay, we talked earlier about you know, some of the differences between the state and federal law. So the federal law, Davis-Bacon Act, covers work usually just inside the fence in that public work site. State law, much broader in scope. Courts have told us that work contemplated by the contract is going to trigger our state prevailing wage provisions. So you know, something about that contract, you're doing it off-site, still covered work for our purposes. And we talked about the materials delivery, sand, gravel, that kind of thing, where it's going to be incorporated into the project right away, covered work for us. The stockpile thing, one example we had was county was going to, you know, resurface a road. The local gravel pit was going to be closed down for 2 weeks in the summer. Well, that's the exact time when the county wanted to do the road. So county arranged to get the gravel from the gravel pit, put it all in one location, you know, at a close to where they were going to use it, but not, you know, using it right away. So they dropped all the gravel, one location. We looked at that scenario. Yeah, it had to be picked up from there, put back into trucks, moved to where it's going to be incorporated into the project. So yeah, that's a good example of a stockpile in that scenario. And our bottom thing here said if it is a you know, non-standard item that's fabricated, you know, within the state borders or outside the border, the transport of that item to our public works project site is also going to be covered work for our purposes. Okay, once again, get a project. Most WASDOT road projects, there's state and federal funds in it. So yeah, don't go buy a lottery ticket that day. Not your lucky day. You got a lot more work to do on these, a lot more paperwork, because you have to follow both sets of regulations. You know, perform to the higher of those standards. So, you know, generally the state prevailing wage rates are higher than the federal ones. But let's say in this scenario, a federal one is higher. So, okay, you would have to pay the higher the rates, that'd be the federal rate. Okay, what happens when that worker gets into a daily overtime situation? Because of our state daily overtime requirements, that may boost his wage up higher during that overtime portion. So yeah, now he would have to be paid the state prevailing wage rates. because it's the higher rate. When it comes off that overtime situation, it may revert back to the federal being the higher. So, definitely something else you have to keep in mind on these joint projects like this. Here's some resources for the Davis-Bacon Act work. 2 years ago, I did sit through the training that they put on, outreach events and training they put on for this, because I just wanted to make myself a little bit more familiar with this. That was 2 straight days of listening to this kind of stuff. So yeah, was interesting. We don't give any advice on the Davis-Bacon side of this. That program is run by the U.S. Department of Labor. Totally different rules and regulations. But here's some resources for you on that. They do in-person seminars. They're also doing webinars. In this Field Operations Handbook, Chapter 15, that specifically relates to the Davis-Bacon Act and how that works for public works projects. So good resources here if you need them for the federal side of that. Just that we don't do anything at all with that. The certified payroll records that you submit, there was a federal form and a state form for WSDOT projects that have that federal requirement. Our system does allow you to check or to select which affirmation page that you want to use for your certified payroll records. So you can select the federal affirmation page, so you're meeting that requirement for the federal side, along with the state affirmation page, different information on both forms. So you're meeting the requirements of both of those programs. All right, what is L&I responsible for in this whole mess? Well, we establish those prevailing wage rates. That's said one of those things the industrial statistician is charged with in RCW 3912-015. We determine those classifications of labor, scope of work descriptions. We've talked about those. We process and certify those intent and affidavit forms. We have a team of 6 processors that work on those. Each and every contractor working in public works in the state has to submit those forms to us. We are getting roughly just increased. I think we're getting it's roughly 16,000 of those a month. So public works is a $6 billion industry in the state of Washington. It's billion with a B. So a lot of these forms coming through. We also investigate timely complaints alleging violations of this Public Works Act. We too have 10 investigators throughout the state. And unfortunately, they stay pretty busy with contractors that have, aren't complying with the rules. And that is, part of our mandate also is to get those bad actors out of the game. We want the contractors that are following the rules to have equal chance at getting these projects. Someone decides they're not going to pay the prevailing wage rate, gives them a distinct unfair advantage when competing for those projects. So that's what we're looking for, is to keep those cheaters out of the game. We do receive all those certified payroll records. Those are all submitted online now since January 1st of 2020. We'll talk more about certified payroll here in just a minute. Okay, the contract awarding agency. That's that agency using the public funds. They can only award contracts to responsible contractor. And take a look at RCW 3904-350. Basically has a list there of what a responsible contractor looks like. And much of the information that you're asked to verify there can be found on our Verify Contractor page. Good one-stop location where you can see company name, UBI, contractor registration, industrial insurance. Have they met our training requirement? So a lot of good information available there. So awarding agencies also can only award those contracts to properly licensed contractors. Not all contractors have to be licensed. Dump truck drivers, landscape maintenance don't have to be, but of course, plumbers, electricians, carpenters have to have that contractor registration. You also cannot award contracts to contractors that are on our debarred list. Various ways contractors can be caught doing bad things. Catch them enough times doing enough bad things. We're going to put them on our debarred list, and they can't work on public works projects. Working in public works projects it's a privilege. It's not a right. So we can debar you from working on the projects if you do bad things. That awarding agency also must obtain that approved statement of intent to pay prevailing wage from each and every contractor before they can make any payments to that contractor. Once that form is in place, they can make progress payments throughout the life of the project. But that requirement is, one of the incentives to get the contractor to file their intent forms. Have to have that in place before the awarding agency can pay you. And the affidavit of wages paid form, that has to be received from each and every contractor prior to release of retainage for that project. So incentive for filing of both of those forms. Once again, they come as a set. So, a little bit more incentive to get those filed. They can't pay you initially, or they can't close out that project and release retainage until those forms are in place. Okay, what are you responsible for as the contractor out there? Well, first of all, you have to be eligible to bid on the public works projects, not debarred. You have to pay those that prevailing wage rate to those laborers, workers, mechanics. Covered trades have to be paid at least our published wage rate. Said you can always pay more, but you cannot pay less. You have to be, registered or licensed as required. Said not all contractors need to be, but contractor registration is required. Needs to be in place and updated regularly. And award subcontracts only to responsible contractors. Just like the awarding agency is going through that checklist, make sure that Prime is a responsible contractor. You should be doing the same to any subcontractors you hire. The only thing we can't fix at the end would be the debarment, but it's a whole lot easier on all parties concerned if you go through that checklist, make sure everything is up to date with any subs you hire prior to actually hiring them. Make sure you're communicating to the subcontractors about the prevailing wage requirements. We hear a lot, hey, they didn't tell me it was a prevailing wage project. Well, there is that duty to communicate all the way down the line. So make sure you're doing that. So going to resolve issues that may come up later on. Trying to get that project closed out, and here you're waiting on this guy to get his intent and affidavit forms filed, but you never told him it was a prevailing wage project. So may cause some problems there. For this project over $10,000, there's been a requirement in the law for quite some time to post that statement of intent at the Public Works project site. Once again, this is a Worker Protection Act. Posting of that intent is your way of communicating to those workers that, hey, this is the wage rates you should be, or expect to be paid. So that's been in the law for quite some time. Beginning January 1st of 2020, this is something that can be cited in a notice of violation as a paperwork violation. Your failure to post that on those projects over $10,000. We are in the process of issuing NOV to a couple of contractors that didn't do this. So that is something now that is a potential violation. There are provisions, if you're doing, replacing water lines in the street, we know you don't have the intent posted down there in the hole you're digging, but have it somewhere where the workers can see it. There's a job shack where they come to in the mornings before they go out and do their work. Have it there. Some creative ways of doing that. Send it to them via email, send it to them via text, something like that. But yeah, that is a requirement now that we can cite if you fail to do that. Okay, here is the checklist from RCW 3904-350. Is the contractor registered? Do they have a UBI? Do they have industrial insurance? Do they have employment security registration? Do they have Department of Revenue? Are they set up with them? Is the contractor debarred? Our debarred list used to be an Excel spreadsheet that was updated every 6 months or so. Now it is a real-time database. Check that. That's the first thing you should check when you're considering hiring someone. See if they're on that list or not. A fairly recent addition also was this training requirement. There was something that came down through the legislature. We have a series of 5 training modules online that can be taken, any time of the day or night to meet this requirement. To be exempted from that, the company has to have a UBI in place for 3 years and has to have at least 3 approved affidavits in our prevailing wage intent affidavit system. If they meet that criteria, then they're exempted from the training. But otherwise, they have to meet the training requirement. We said we do have the 5 modules online that can be taken. Those can be taken anytime, actually, even if you already have met the requirement. Certainly encourage you to check those out. Just our most current information. We used to participate in the in-person training events sponsored by Department of Labor and Industries, where they had, I think it was like 25 different courses for contractors. It was all in person. We stopped that with all the COVID stuff, but hopefully this fall we can ramp that back up again, because those were always well attended by contractors, and that was also a way for them to meet this requirement. And we will talk more in depth about this later on, but this apprenticeship utilization requirements, if that is a component of your project, make sure you're checking that subcontractor you're going to hire, that they are not in violation of any apprenticeship issues. Okay, you're talking more about that training requirement. That's actually July 1st of 2019 is when that took effect. We're still seeing a lot of contractors that have not met that requirement. We are no longer approving the intent forms for contractors that that don't have this requirement met. So, you know, a new contractor, if you're considering hiring, or one that hasn't had much experience, you know, definitely a question worth asking of them. Hey, do you know about this requirement? Have you taken care of it? Those modules take, I think it's about an hour and a half to complete. But so that is something that our system checks when we're processing those intent forms. Our system checks the training requirement, checks industrial insurance, and contractor registration. So those are three of the things that we check automatically on all the forms. And I said, right now we are not approving intent forms if the contractor has not met that training requirement yet. And once again, if they need contractor registration, make sure they have that. And there's that is the requirement in RCW 3906020. You know, you have to verify the sub you're hiring. That goes all the way. Awarding agency does the prime does the first tier subs do second tier subs, all the way down the line. There is that requirement to you know, do that responsible contractor check on them. Okay. You know, this is telling us again, you can't do contracts with unregistered or unlicensed contractors. You know, your contractor registration is good for 2 years. You know, if you don't get that renewed in time, it's going to lapse. You know, small amount of time and it lapse, you know, that's okay. But if you're on a project and your contractor registration expired 6 months ago, that's going to be a problem. We're going to be asking questions when you submit that affidavit, and it's going to get referred over to contractor registration for possible action on them for operating without a valid contractor's license. So, you know, certainly watch that kind of thing. Be on top of that with yourself and your subcontractors. Okay, here once again, just talks about that requirement to check all the way down each level. You know, make sure they have the appropriate license. If the contractor you're hiring for, excuse me, you're hiring them for, you know, electrical work, make sure they're submitting their forms using their electrical license, not their, you know, general contractor license. So definitely something you need to be aware of and be checking as you go through the process. And once again, just going to recap here. Prevailing wage rate, 3 pieces of information you have to have for that. It's the county where that work's being done, the trade and occupation that the worker's going to be doing, and that effective date for the wages. We went through the effective date, you know, varies a little bit by the contract type. You need to be aware of that, and you know, be aware of the, is it the bid due date? Is it the award date? Is it the date, you know, when the contractor was, you know, was awarded if it wasn't through a bid process? Have to be aware of that kind of stuff. And once again, our journey level lookup, wage rate lookup page. Look up any, you know, you're coming onto an older contract, you get that prime contractor's intent ID number. That'll give you the effective date for that. You can go back, look up what those wage rates are that are in effect for that project. Locality, talked about that earlier. It's the county that the work is being done in. Our wage rates, you know, do vary by county. There used to be a bigger discrepancy between a lot of our county wage rates because of the way the wages are now set by the collective bargaining agreements. Those covered usually a bigger geographical area. So it smoothed out some of the discrepancies that we used to see in the big gaps or jumps in the wage rates by county. For on-site work, you use the county where the project is located. Off-site construction, you can use that where the county where the work is performed. Instead, if you've got a project in King County, but you're doing something in your shop related to that project in Pierce County, you can use the Pierce County rates for that. But then the transport and installation of that project up to King County, it's going to be at the King County rates. Delivery of non-standard items manufactured off-site. Once again, use the county where the project is located or the delivery point. So it sets that. Multiple counties, can be listed on the intent and affidavit. There was a fairly recent change where if you missed the county on the intent, you used to have to refile the intent. But now we are allowing you to add additional counties on the affidavit. Well, it's a fairly recent change to that. But you can list multiple counties on your forms. We do have one contractor that services emergency generators for Washington Military Department. They listed all 39 counties in the state because there's emergency generators they have to work on in all 39 counties. So yeah, there's no problem with listing multiple counties on your forms. Okay, residential rates. Don't know if anybody gets into the residential construction. We see this a lot with housing authorities. They can use, there's in our journey level wage lookup page, you'll see all of the wages are in alphabetical order from asbestos abatement workers down to water well drillers. And you get down into the R's and you'll see like residential carpenter, residential laborer, that kind of thing. We do have the residential rates. They are generally less than the regular rates you would see there. But to use those very strict definition of instances where you can use those. We see a residential construction. It's a construction, alteration, repair, improvement, same as a public works definition. But this is single family dwellings, duplexes, apartments, not exceeding 4 stories in height, just being a residential building, not a mixed use. If there's commercial on the bottom floor and then apartments above it, residential rates cannot be used. This definition was also expanded here recently to include, the affordable housing, for like homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, weatherization for income or low income households. So the definition was, expanded to capture those other types of housing requirements also. Usually get a question about college dorms. Does that fall under residential? Answer is no, they do not. We've looked at that extensively, and there isn't the same tenant landlord rights and responsibilities that we would normally see in this type of residential scenario. The colleges can, move students in and out of rooms kind of at their will. It just doesn't meet the definition of residential here for what we're looking at. Okay, we have 3 types of workers in the state, and one of those is owners. To be considered an owner for prevailing wage purposes, the person must own at least 30% of the business. 30% is the magic number for us. Industrial insurance allows for their program, they allow an owner at 10%. For us, though, it is 30%. if they meet that criteria, they have to file all, or have to still file forms and all that kind of thing. But the owner operator does not have to pay themselves the prevailing wage rate. That's the only exception through this law process. They don't have to pay themselves the prevailing wage rate, but they do have to comply with all other provisions of prevailing wage law. Also in this, and we see subsection 4 here, workers employed, monthly, monthly salary type thing. Well, how do you do that? Well, our wage rates are only published in an hourly rate. So it is up to the contractor to do the math, figure out that person getting the salary for the work they're doing, does that salary equivalent or per hour equivalent at least equal our published wage rate. If it does, they're good to go. If it does not, then they have to be bumped up to at least our published wage rate to meet our requirements here. I did get in a question from Jordan. It says on a GCCM project, contract award date, does a construction contract was signed. If you remember on the GCCM ones, there's going to be 2 sets of forms. The design phase, the effective date for that is going to be when that contract was awarded to you from the awarding agency, when they brought you in on that project. That's going to be the design phase for it. The construction phase, that is going to begin when that maximum allowable contract cost is agreed to. That's going to begin the construction phase of it. So there's going to be 2 distinct dates there for each of those, for lack of a better term, phases of that particular type of contracting project. Does that answer your question?
For the most part, yes. Would that change the effective date of the prevailing wage rates as well then?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Understood. All right.
Yeah, may very well. Okay, we will continue on here. Okay, we have the owners. We just talked about have to own at least 30% of the business before they can be considered an owner. The other type that we have is apprentices. In apprentices, they have to be enrolled in a state-approved apprenticeship training program, and you as the employer have to be a registered training agent for a worker to be considered an apprentice. And we do have the wage rates for apprentices. You can look those up on our system there also. The apprentices go through a training process that is partly classroom and then partly hands-on on your project. And each of the apprentice training programs has their own criteria for ratio of apprentices to journey level workers and that kind of thing. So that has to be followed, and our apprentice program is the one that is the best source of information for that. Well, like I said, on our forms, we capture on the intent, it's just a yes or no for the apprentices. When you file your affidavit form at the end of the project, we're going to ask for specific information on those apprentices: their apprentice ID number, first and last name, and the step that they're in. And the step is where they are in their training program. All the programs have a little bit different degrees of those steps, but like step 1 is usually 0 to 1,000 hours, step 2, 1,001 to 2,000 hours, that kind of thing. And that's what we're looking for, is what step are they in their particular program. And apprentices is becoming a very big issue here in the state. It was realized a couple of years ago now that with all the baby boomers retiring, there's, isn't there, or they're getting out of the carpenter, the electrician, the plumber trades. We don't have people coming into those kind of trades. So a lot of money, a lot of focus has been put on ramping up these apprentice programs to get the workers trained up to go into those specific journey level trades. Okay, so once again, apprentices have to be paid at least the hourly rate for whatever step they're in that apprentice program. If they are not enrolled in that approved apprenticeship training program, then these rates cannot be used. There's also trainees out there, going through a somewhat of a similar training program, but they're not apprentices. Distinct difference between that. To be an apprentice, they have to be in the state approved apprenticeship training program, and you have to be a training agent to use those apprentice rates. Okay, if they are not an owner and don't qualify as an apprentice, then they are considered journey level wages to be paid to those workers. So, you've got that guy that's, you just picked up off the street a couple of days ago, and you've got the guy that's been working for you for 20 years. They're both at least due our published wage rate for the prevailing wage project. You can pay the one with more experience more if you choose to, but they're both due at least our minimum of our published wage rate. Okay, those apprentices, like I said, captured on the affidavit, captured on the certified payroll. Our system we got a few hiccups with our system. You have to be very careful on the apprentices as you're entering them. We've seen ones where the Social Security number gets mixed up for the certified payroll, or the numbers get transposed in the apprentice ID. Have to be very careful with those as you're putting those into our system. And like I said, our affidavit system does capture that information on apprentices. It does provide information on the apprenticeship utilization, if that's a requirement for your project. But as far as specific questions about the apprentice programs themselves, or you getting into that that type of thing, I do encourage you to reach out to our apprentice program. Jim or Patrick, I have down here on the slide, really good contacts. They will answer pretty quickly, and they are the subject matter experts on the apprentice area. So if we get any questions in, specific like that, we always refer them over to Jim or Patrick. Okay, there are certain projects that do have this apprenticeship utilization requirement, and I said that that's put into place to encourage the use of apprentices. Generally 15% of the man hours on the project have to be done by apprentices. So it's certainly, making that a requirement. It's encouraging participation by apprentices, and definitely getting them out there to get that hands-on experience along with the classroom experience that they're receiving. So, and there is, like I said, baby boomers getting out of a lot of those, retiring, getting out of those trades that we've, always depended upon them being there for. And this apprenticeship, some of the, the selling points on that is that pathway to creating family wage careers. Apprenticeship is, effective training method. So yeah, a lot of emphasis being put on apprentices right now. So if you can get into that, help out the industries that be beneficial for everybody around. So we did hear, it was a couple of years ago now though, but there were projects that were actually being delayed because they didn't have enough journey level electricians to work on the project. So, you know, it's kind of coming to a head. That's where why a lot of this emphasis was put on from, you know, the governor on down in ramping up these apprentice programs. For that apprenticeship utilization, here's the law. It's called RCW 3904. You know, why it's required, you know, all the specifics of that. Usually is that 15% of all labor hours have to be performed by apprentices. You know, there are good faith reasons, you know, if your particular trade doesn't have any apprentice programs, something like that. But yeah, something to keep in mind if you get in on these projects. If you have questions, get a hold of our apprentice program, and they can help you out with that. Now we've got a question here: do trainees satisfy this requirement? No, they do not. There's a distinct difference between a trainee and an apprentice. Trainees are enrolled in the state-approved apprenticeship training program, and you are the registered training agent. With the trainees, we'll see those in, I think, plumbing and electrical, do not meet the apprenticeship utilization requirement. Two different categories there of workers. And we do have this online system, this ARTS, the apprenticeship registration and tracking system. If you're not sure that apprentice, you know, exactly, or, you know, your bookkeeper isn't sure of their apprentice ID number, that kind of thing, they can go to this website and we'll look them up, tell you what step they're in. All that kind of information is available there. And then once again, the apprenticeship program, apprentice@lni.wa.gov, or Jim or Patrick are really good resources for anything related to apprentices. Okay, well, and yeah, and if they're not the owners, not the apprentice, then they're journey level workers. The three types of workers we have in the state. Another question that we get a lot is supervisors. You know, if you look in our wage rates, I think the only one that has any reference to supervisor or lead man is the power equipment operator mechanic. We do have this set up in Washington Administrative Code for supervisors. Are they covered? Are they not? The answer is going to depend upon what they're doing on the project. Are they just walking around the project site with a clipboard, taking notes, yelling at people to get back to work? Not covered work for our purposes. We see here if they spend 20 to less than 50% of their hours in a week actually performing a trade, then they are due at least the published wage rate for the trade they're doing. If more than 50% of their time that week is doing covered work, then they're due prevailing wage for that entire week that they're out there. So this WAC here kind of breaks down what the criteria are if they're covered or not. And once again, talks about salary. If they're on a salary, you have to do the math, figure out what the hourly equivalent is of that salary. If it exceeds our published wage rate, you're good to go. If it doesn't, then it need to be bumped up to at least our published wage rate. Okay, usual benefits. Talked about that as being one of the components of prevailing wage. And our usual benefits or fringe benefits. We have 5 categories that we recognize: the medical, the pension, vacation, holiday, and apprenticeship training. Benefits are not a requirement. If you do pay into fringe benefit programs on behalf of the worker, you can take a credit for that amount against our published wage rate. So say our wage rate is $40 per hour. You don't pay benefits. Our intent and affidavit forms, we would expect to see $40 in the wage column. If you do pay benefits, you pay $5 in medical per hour, $2.50 in pension per hour, $2.50 in vacation per hour. You have a total of $10 in benefits paid on behalf of the employee. Now on our form, we would see 30 in the wage, 10 in the fringe column. As long as those two columns at least equal our published wage rate, you've met the criteria. You're good to go. When it comes to paying overtime to that worker, you'll see in our overtime codes, it says that the overtime is based upon the wage rate paid. So in the first example, worker's getting $40 per hour. He gets into an overtime situation. He's now due $60 an hour overtime rate. Other worker paying in the benefit program, he has the $30 wage rate, 10 in fringes. Now his almost time and a half, it's $45 per hour. So a little bit of difference there when the worker gets into an overtime situation. I said, once again, fringe benefits, not a requirement, but if you do pay them, they have to be in these 5 categories. Fringe benefits is also something that we are taking a closer look at. We are seeing some contractors with very high fringe benefit amounts, $30,000 a year medical plans, that kind of thing. And that is something that we look at when we do investigations. We also review the fringe benefit plans, make sure that they're bona fide plan. As if contractor does a lot of overtime work, claim a high fringe benefit amount, it may give them that unfair advantage in the labor costs there. So that is something we definitely look at. We review that on the forms when they come in and during investigations. That's also something we look at. Once again, talked earlier about the overtime. We have the 3 types of overtime, just to keep it a little bit more exciting than the federal program, which only has the weekly. We have the daily, over 8 hours in a day, unless that 410 agreement is in place. The weekly overtime, and then those trade-specific overtime codes. Certified payroll requirements is again January 1st, 2020. That became a requirement that all contractors submit this weekly certified payroll reports, not less than once per month. That is something that we've haven't enforced that yet. Given contractors a minute to get reshuffle their business organization or whatever they need to do to take on that extra workload. Always been a requirement to maintain certified payroll records, but not a requirement to send them to us. But now you have to send them to us. So we've given some time to allow contractors to make that adjustment. And we have identified contractors that are not complying with that. We've sent a couple of, a gentle reminder of that, throughout our website. And then we've sent a little more pointed reminder to the contractors that haven't been doing that via email. And now we are going to start sending the demand letters to them with the time frame. This has been the law. We've given you a chance to get this done. You haven't. Now you have 2 weeks to submit the X number of weeks of certified payroll. If they're not making a good faith effort to do that, that is a paperwork violation and something we can issue notice of violation for failure to file. The civil penalty for that is $500 per week. So that can add up pretty quickly on your projects that's, taken 6 months or a year to do. So we are slowly ramping up our enforcement of that, so that it's, the requirement, making sure everybody is abiding by the same rules. So again, federal program, officers required the weekly submission of certified payroll records. Our form, if you're in a situation where you have to provide the federal form also, our system allows you to do that. Select that federal affirmation page. And we did work with WSDOT and everything, and Department of Labor in making sure our system met the requirement, and our system is now the repository for all of those certified payroll records. Okay, duty to communicate. I said earlier, there is a requirement, all the way down the line. The awarding agency is supposed to communicate it to the prime to the first tier subs, first tier to second tier, to third tier to fourth tier. We hear that a lot out there. They didn't tell me it was prevailing wage. Not a reason. There was a requirement to tell you. Now you have to play catch up and comply with all of our rules. Okay, how do you communicate that? This is a slide we also use within our awarding agency presentations, and there is that requirement to communicate that. RCW 3912-030. Provide them, if it's a subcontractor that you're hiring, provide the prime contractor's intent ID number. That's a good way to communicate that. They have that in prime's intent ID number when they go to file their forms. Box that's going to ask for that, they enter it. It's going to bring in all of the administrative data over to their form, all the awarding agency information, the bid due date, award date, gives them the effective date for the project so they can look up the correct wage rates. All of that will come over. If you don't provide them that intent ID number, give them that effective date. Tell them the county where the work is being done. You'd think that would be a no-brainer. It's not. We see that being an issue quite often. And help educate them about if they're going to be doing off-site work. You know what you're hiring for. If you think they're going to be doing off-site work, make sure they understand off-site work can be done at the wage rate for the locality, the county where the work is being done, and transportation, installation at your project site done at that other wage rate. Okay, I'm going to get into talk about the bond, contract bonds. It's usually the payment and performance bonds. Guarantee contract performance, payment to workers, material suppliers, payment of taxes, all that kind of stuff. All contractors generally have those. If the awarding agency, does not make the bond requirement, then they become liable for any claims that would otherwise be done under that bond. So there is some incentive, to them and to you to ensure that all contractors have a performance bond in place. There are some exceptions for this. I said for the contracts 150,000 or less, the awarding agency can increase the retainage to 10% in lieu of the 5% that we normally see, instead of having that contract bond in place. Same thing with limited public works. If they're using that type of procurement method, they can waive the contract bond and retainage, but then they assume liability for any claims. So it's an option, but we don't really see that used very often. Retainage, it's RCW 60.28.011, requires the contract retainage, usually 5% of the contract amount. And that retainage, that serves as a trust fund that can be used for several things. One of those things is unpaid worker wages. Prevailing wage program has first dibs on that retainage. That's why when one of our investigators is doing, if they're doing their work, do an audit, have findings, one of the first things they will do is submit a notice of claim against that retainage amount. Put a lien on your project for those unpaid worker wages. Like I said, the Prevailing Wage Program has first dibs on that. We're going to get first shot at any contract retainage amount. In the RCW 3912-040 does require all affidavit forms be approved before retainage can be released. There is for contracts over $35,000. When the project is totally complete, all 10 affidavit forms are in. The awarding agency submits, that's called a notice of completion, to Department of Revenue, Employment Security Department, and L&I. 3 agencies review those for different reasons, but that form has to be, or releases have to be obtained from those 3 agencies before the retainage can be released. When L&I gets that, what they're doing, we have it's a small section, I think it's 5 people now. They look at what the contractor submitted on their affidavit for the trades used, hours used, and they'll look at what that same contractor has submitted on their quarterly reports for industrial insurance on what trades they used, how many hours worked in that. Comparing those 2 documents together. If there is, a discrepancy, that's where they start asking questions. So that's what they're looking at. That's sometimes why it takes also so long for that release to come back from L&I, is because L&I looks at all of the contractors on the project. ESD and DOR only look at the prime contractor. L&I looks at all of the contractors. So if you have 30 subcontractors in your project, it's going to take a minute because they're checking quarterly reports and affidavits of all of those contractors as it goes through. Okay, as with virtually everything, there are exceptions to the retainage. Federal transportation projects, those no longer, our retainage can no longer be kept on those. So if there was an issue with those, we would have to go after the performance bond. As a program, we can do that, even if there is retainage, but with the bonding, we're one of many requesters against that bond. With the retainage, we have first dibs. So that's why we go after the retainage first. If the awarding agency is using that small works roster procurement method, they can waive the retainage for that, but then once again, they assume a liability. Same thing if they're using the limited public works procurement method. They can waive any of the bonding requirements, the retainage requirements, but then they become liable for that. Okay, everybody's favorite, the paperwork. Yes. Okay, well, maybe not everybody's favorite, but still. There are the two forms that we require. It's a statement of intent to pay prevailing wages, and then the affidavit of wages paid form, along with the weekly certified payroll records to be submitted to us. That approved intent has to be on file before the awarding agency can make their initial payment to you. They can make progress payments through the rest of the life of the contract, but they can't make that first payment until that affidavit, or until that intent is on file. Affidavit is filed when your work is totally complete. And once again, all the affidavits have to be on file before any retainage can be released. All contractors, including owner-operators, have to file the forms. That form filing requirement is what helps us build that project tree that you see when you look on forms now. There's a little button that says project dashboard. Click on that, open it up, and it gives you the list of all of the contractors, subcontractors on the forms. Shows you their intent and affidavit filings, their certified payroll filings. So all that information helps us build that that family tree on each of the projects. Okay. Yeah, on your affidavit is where you list all of the subcontractors you hired. You identify them on yours. If they hired anyone, they identify that on theirs. You always identify your next your direct hires for the project. Weekly certified payroll records, which again have to be submitted to us no less than once per month. Those are all submitted online. We no longer accept the paper versions like we used to. Those all have to be submitted online. A couple of ways of doing that. They can be manually entered when you go to do your intent. There's an option there to submit certified payroll records. They can be entered that way, or they can be uploaded also using an XML format. So a couple of ways that you can get those in here to us. Those are all filed through our prevailing wage intent affidavit PWIA system. We do have step-by-step instructions available for that process. And if you have any questions, give us a call and we can certainly help out with that process and get you through that. Because we realize it is a heavy lift. You're now something additional requirement we put on you, but what's called out in the law wasn't just our idea. What's called out in the law there, so it's something we are looking for enforcing now. Okay, there is a processing fee for each of the intent and affidavit. That's what keeps us in business. Allows me to come out and do these kind of presentations to you. And that was $40. It was reduced to $20. That reduction was supposed to end June 30th, so end of this month. That's going to keep going at 20 for a couple of months. We are in the process of evaluating that, and it's probably going to go back up to $40, in the near future. So if you do have forms you're hesitating on sending in to us, or intent forms, you may want to do that sooner rather than later, because it will, as soon as that becomes effective, the price will change on that. But it's not going to exceed $40, but it may very well go back up to what it was prior to this 2-year reduction of the processing fee. Talked a little bit there earlier about the posting of that intent for those projects over $10,000. Said it has been a requirement for a long time to do that. Now it is something that we can cite you for if it's not done. that is a $500 penalty under or paperwork violations, RCW 3912-050. So if you're not already doing that, make sure you've got a plan in place to make that happen and get that information out to the workers. Okay, we do have step-by-step instructions also for filing the intent and affidavit forms. Once again, those all have to be done electronically also. We're no longer accepting the paper version, with the little caveat that we are a few that had already been submitted on paper. We're still allowing that, but the 99% answer is that no, they have to all be filed online. There is a process to setting up an account through our PWIA system. We said we got these step-by-step instructions. You can call our processing team. They can help out with any contractors that have challenges with that process. So if you're hiring somebody and they're not familiar with this process, give them this information. We can send them the step-by-step instructions. They can go through and get registered into our system. It's we realize it's kind of a daunting, scary process at first, but once you do a few of them, kind of get the hang of it, and it's not too painful once you get actually get a little bit of experience under your belt on these. Okay, once again, that posting requirement, and the ordinance can't make payments until that intent form is approved. So certainly incentive to comply with that portion. Certified payroll reports have to be, have to file the weekly certified payroll reports not less than once per month. I do have the step-by-step instructions for that process also. This is kind of what that looks like. As for the intent ID number, so it's tied to the correct intent. Caveat on this is be very careful when you select your work week. It can start and end on any 7-day period, but once you choose a date, it can't be changed. So if your paydays are Sunday to Saturday, make sure you're putting in the correct date to capture that. Our system wasn't set up to allow changing of the pay periods, so be very careful with that. That's something that we see quite often. Someone's looking at your time cards, and the worker didn't start working on Monday or start working on Tuesday, so they put that as the beginning date for the week. No, it has to be what you've selected as your standard 7-day work week is what we're looking at for there. Okay. We also have YouTube videos out there on filing the certified payroll reports, and here's the instructions for that, how to get there. Also talks about this in our training modules. So we do have try to communicate how to best comply with that requirement through several ways. But if anyone does have questions on that, please give us a call, and we can walk you through the process. Okay, errors in the statement of intent. Like I said, this is a Worker Protection Act, so we're looking to protect the worker, make sure that they have information, let them know what they can expect to be paid on this. There are some awarding agencies that have a little bit stricter view of the intent than the department does. Our look at it is that the intent is your best estimate of what's going to happen on the project. You put down, contract amount. That's what you think it's going to be. Your start date. You put down what your anticipated start date is. Yes or no to contractors, yes or no to owners. You put trades down there that you think you're going to use. As long as you have a trade on there, you can switch those out, add, delete on the affidavit. The intent is your best estimate of what's going to happen. There are some awarding agencies that do require the intent to have all of the trades listed that you're using. We've seen that. That's their requirement, not ours. But on the affidavit is where you tell us exactly what happened on that project. You tell us what your contract amount was, when you started the project, when you finished it, what trade and occupations you used, their wage rate, fringe amount, hours worked for that particular one. The affidavit is the actual capturing of the facts of what happened on that project. And if it is something that is going to affect the worker, like that effective date incorrect, that's going to require filing of the new intent. And every time you do file a new one, there is the processing fee that you incur for that. So be careful as you're doing these. Okay, so the affidavit of wages paid, that is filed after all of your work is complete. There is no requirement in the law, that it be submitted within 10 days of your last day on the job. There's nothing like that. It's just when you feel you're complete on the project. If you submit your affidavit, it gets approved, and you have to go back out to the project. Additional Prime decided they wanted you to do additional work on that same project. You went back out for a warranty call, something like that. Then a new affidavit would be required, capturing all of the work done on that project. And once again, all those affidavits have to be on file and approved before the awarding agency can submit that notice of completion if they need to for the project. And it's one thing L&I looks at when the notice of completion is submitted. If all the affidavits aren't approved, they're just going to kick it back to the awarding agency. And you, as hiring contractor or prime, use that project dashboard. It'll show you there if a contractor has not submitted, their affidavit. So use that information. They were out there, they finished all their work, don't plan on coming back. You see they haven't submitted that affidavit. Great opportunity to get a hold of them. Say, hey, see you haven't submitted this, get that submitted. Better to do that earlier in the process than, all of a sudden you're trying to get your retainage and you can't because sub you hired hasn't submitted their form. So use that information you have out there, help manage your project better so there are no surprises at the end of it. Affidavit filing fee, there are no exceptions to the filing fee for the intent. Everyone pays the filing fee on the intent. Currently $20, likely going to go up to $40 again sometime this fall. For the affidavit, there are certain conditions that have to be met and that filing fee is waived. One of those conditions is there's no employees reported on the affidavit because all work was subcontracted or was an owner-operator only doing the work. The filing fee is waived. There's still a requirement to submit the form, but there's no filing fee for that. Also, the contract dollar amount, if it is less than $750, there can be workers, but then the filing fee is waived also on that one. Always the filing fee for the intent though. we couldn't figure out a way to do that. So yeah, always a filing fee on the intent. Okay, there's the standard intent and affidavit forms, and there is also what we call the combined intent and affidavit forms. Two types of projects where this can be used. The first one is for contracts under $2,500. The use of these are at the awarding agency's discretion. They are the ones that decide if they want to use this alternate form filing process. If they choose to use this for this small dollar amount project, they can. There's some restrictions on use of this. Can't divide the project up to come under the $2,500 amount. It's only one contractor in the project, no subcontractors at all. With this form, there is no processing fee for it. So a small dollar amount contract, processing fee is also waived on this one. Our other form of the combined form. Oh, I have a typo on here. This is project up to $50,000. That was a change a couple of years ago and missed that one. But yeah, this is now projects up to $50,000. The 2501 up to $50,000. Virtually same requirements on this. Public agency decides if they want to use the form. Both of these forms are only done online. There used to be a paper version of them. They are done online. They are initiated by that awarding agency because they're the ones that are allowing the use of this form. Can't break the project up to come under that dollar amount. And for this one, there is a $40 processing fee. Why would this one be used? Not sure. Not sure. The only the awarding agencies are accepting a certain degree of liability by using these forms. If there was an investigation as a result of this particular project, the awarding agency is the one liable for the worker wages. So I'm not sure why they would use this type of form, but it is out there. It is out there for use. Once again, the restrictions on this. It is the awarding agency that decides use of this form. When these were paper forms, we found out to our dismay that a lot of times it was the contractor submitting the form to the awarding agency and kind of forcing their hand in using this type of form. That's never been allowed. There is that liability to the awarding agency, so that's why they're the one that has to take on that risk. Basically, we do have a couple of awarding agencies out there that will not use these forms at all. Small dollar amount contracts, but they require contractors to do the regular intent and affidavit forms, and that's certainly their prerogative. This is voluntary use of these forms. No subcontractors allowed on this. It is meant for a single contractor, a single payment, small project, one-time event. Can't divide the project up to come under contract amount. And it is the awarding agency that is the approving authority for this. Program does not approve these. It is the awarding agency that approves them. We do see them. I mean, they're in our regular system with our regular intent and affidavits, but it is the awarding agency that approves this type of form. Okay, well, we've talked here about the intent and affidavit forms, and that's a requirement for each and every contractor out there. Well, what happens if a contractor doesn't file the forms? We talked about retainage not being able to be released. that notice of completion that's required for a project, that can't be submitted if there's missing affidavits. Prior to implementation of this filing on behalf of FOBO policy, there was not a good way to close out a project and ever get that retainage released. With this policy that was developed, this allows the hiring contractor or the prime contractor to file on behalf of a sub that has not filed. Our policy is available at this link here, available on our policies and determinations site. There is a packet that is required for the one who's filing on behalf of to fill out. These are done on paper. One exception to our no paper rule is this. We're still working to implement this into our regular system. But paper intent affidavit, or affidavit and or intent form has to be submitted. There's a packet of information. We do require an assumption of liability statement. We're still looking for someone to to cover those workers if they weren't paid appropriately. So there's an assumption of liability statement that the requester submits with this. Little bit of legwork we ask you to do, send them a certified letter, asking them to file, that kind of thing. When we get this packet in, it is assigned to one of our Tumwater office personnel, and they do basically a little mini investigation. They will try to get a hold of this contractor, find out if there's, a reason they haven't filed. Did they just forget and ignore your letter, or what's going on? I did these also for quite a while, and I was surprised at how many of these we get. We get probably about 5 of these in a week. So happening a lot more out there than I would have kind of expected to see. But we do, through our investigative process, do make an effort to get them to file. If they do not file, we give them, certain, 2 weeks to file. If they don't, then we will go ahead and process your request to file on their behalf. You will then have an approved intent and affidavit form on file, so the rest of the contract release process can continue. And there is, for the contractor that has failed to file, there is a $500 civil penalty and a strike towards debarment on future public works projects. So there is some teeth behind this process. Okay. What are the consequences of violations that contractors can get into out there? Well, there's fines and penalties. Recent legislation is ESSB 5035. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute. But the fines and penalties have increased quite a bit through the use of this legislation that came through. May also affect your responsible contractor status. You may be debarred. When a notice of violation is issued, contractors are debarred until they pay the amount due. You can get that notice of violation. That's our official citation issued, indicating what you did wrong on the project. Liens, notice of claim. Unfortunately, we submit a lot of those. We've had some fairly large dollar amount cases. But yeah, we're going to submit that notice of claim. That's going to hold up the release of retainage for everyone on their project until that whole process goes through. and sometimes that can take years. Debarment said, working on public works projects is a privilege. It's not a right. So you can be debarred from working on them, not able to bid on public works projects. Okay, here's the kind of violations that will get you on Santa's naughty list. Failure to pay prevailing wage, 2 violations in 5 years, get you a 2-year debarment for that. The paperwork violations, intent affidavit, certified payroll posting, 2 violations in 5 years, get you a 1-year debarment. Other things here also: industrial insurance, workers' comp, contractor registration, can get you taken out of the playing field. So said a lot to do out there, but it's part of what we do is make sure it's a level playing field for everyone. Contractors that are cheating, that's the ones we're looking for. Get them out of the playing field. So ones like yourselves that are doing the right thing, have access to the public works projects. Okay, contract closeout. Talked about all affidavits have to be on file. That notice of completion goes to 3 state agencies. All claims against retainage have to be completed before that project can be released. It's prompt pay for subs. This is an RCW 3904-250. We do not get involved in contractual disputes between contractors. We do have this law in place, though. Talks about the prompt pay to contractors and how it's supposed to work, and the remedies they can contact the awarding agency, that kind of thing. But the program does not get involved in contractual disputes. Anti-bid shopping law. This is on projects over $1 million. The HVAC, plumbing, and electrical contractors have to be identified within an hour of the bid opening. June 11th, 2020, also included the structural steel and rebar contractors have to be identified within 48 hours of the bid opening. Guess this is put in place, high dollar value contracts. The prime was, contacting ABC HVAC company, says, hey, I'm going to bid on this project. What would the HVAC portion of this cost me? They use that, submit their bid, get the winning bid, and then go to HIJ HVAC company and say, hey, ABC HVAC said they could do this job for X. If you can do it for less, I'll give you the work instead. It's the bid shopping. So this was put into place to negate that happening. That's some of the legislation that affected us over the years here. Prevailing wage is normally very high on the legislators' hit list. This year was pretty quiet because there was, I guess, this COVID thing that they were concentrating on. So there wasn't a whole lot of other legislation that happened. But it's just some of the stuff that's affected us here over the years. 2017, big one here, this SB 5734. Let's see. Yeah, reduce that retained instead of a contract bond. Let's see. SB 5036. That was the first time they allowed the use of that unit price contract versus the on-call ones that we talked about earlier there. That 2018 is E2 SHB 1673. That included that churning requirement, SSB 5493, changed the way we establish wage rates. They're now set by collective bargaining agreements where available. Before that, we used to do a survey process, but we came on board with what other states in the country that have prevailing wage programs all set their wage rates by CBAs, and that was enacted here. This ESSB 6143 increased that unit price contracting ability. Before there was public utility districts. Now they tweaked it a little bit and allowed cities to use that process also. ESSB 5035 rocked our world. That one gets its own slide here in just a minute. HB 1743. Previous year they told us wage rates are set by collective bargaining agreements. Well, this law cut a hole in that for residential, or where residential wage rates would be applicable for those, like I said, homeless shelters, that kind of thing. Cut a hole in that requirement, where we now have gone back to a survey process for establishing the residential rates. ESSB 5035, this is one rocked our world. Your organization was helpful to us in negotiating the terms of this particular bill. This actually is the one that set in motion the requirement for the certified payroll records. This one also increased the penalty amount dramatically when we issue a notice of violation. Our penalty used to be 10% or $1,000, or I'm sorry, 20% or $1,000, whichever was greater on the unpaid wages. Under this bill, it is now $5,000 or 50% of the wages owed. There's also 1% per month interest that's charged. So a lot bigger bite out of the wallet of the violator in this process. There is some forgiveness in this process for inadvertent filings, that kind of thing. There's what we refer to as a get out of jail free card for a one-time reduction of the penalties to what they were previously. But this, like I said, this bill really changed our enforcement activity as far as the fines, the penalties, that kind of thing. 2020 legislation. This is where it added the structural steel and rebar contractors to that anti-bid shopping law. 2021 said really slow year. Just updates to a couple of our contracting methods is all that we've seen here. Okay, we have the laws, we have the statutes, we have the rules, and then courts have also helped us out tremendously in figuring out this prevailing wage thing. I'm just going to run through some of those court cases here now. So Everett Concrete Products, that's the one we talked about with the standard versus non-standard. They came back, told us this law is remedial, liberally interpreted for its purpose as a worker protection law, and much broader than the federal law. But it also is limited to work within the state. So we got a lot of good information out of this particular court case. Silver Streak, this is one helped us with that delivery of sand, gravel, that type of materials. This one, all the cool airports had 3 runways. SeaTac did not. So they looked around on where they could build a third runway. Needed an area, mile long, 200 yards wide, plus aprons on the side. Didn't have it. Looks some more and says, hey, if we filled in this valley, yeah, then we would. So that's what they proceeded to do, was fill in this this valley. Our current industrial statistician was a union representative at the time monitoring this project, and they were counting the truckloads of fill that came in. 800,000 truckloads of fill. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that number, but a lot of fill brought in, 150 feet deep in places to get this raised up high enough to be the runway. Workers weren't paid prevailing wage, those truck drivers. Well, hold it. It's Port of Seattle, public agency. They're doing the work of a laborer, worker, mechanic. They're doing something to further this project. Weren't paid prevailing wage. Went up and down through the court system. The employer had an old crumpled yellow letterhead from L&I piece of paper that said at the time, delivery of sand, gravel, related materials, not covered work. So the court said, yeah, they should have been paid, but the contractor relied upon this guidance from L&I. So magic legal term is estoppel. We could not collect for those workers. So how do we do on the old worker protection part on that one? Well, we didn't do so hot, but we revised that WAC 296.127.018 to make sure that from then on we had that type of material delivery covered for prevailing wage purposes. Supporters of the center, this was in Wenatchee. They wanted to build a performing arts center, and they were looking at where the money was coming from for this construction project. There was a grant, there was advanced rent, there was private donations, there was city funds donated to the project. The courts looked at it and said, it's not where the money comes from. No minimum threshold for state. So yes, there is public funds on this with the city contributions, the grant. So yes, it is covered work for our purposes. City of Spokane, this is one we talked about earlier about that ordinary maintenance. Gave us really good guidance. Maintenance by contract, yep, going to be covered work. Very narrow definition of what ordinary maintenance means. Lockheed Shipbuilding, this was Seattle wanted to build a wastewater treatment plant up the Duwamish River, have the outfall from that wastewater treatment plant discharged through the Duwamish River into Deepwater Puget Sound. Looking around for a place to join this several miles of pipe that they needed. Lockheed Shipbuilding didn't have ships building at the time, so they had the space, they had the workers. They said, yeah, bring the pipes here, we'll weld them together for this project. So they brought in a standard pipe, 5-foot diameter, 90 foot long, standard pipe, welded, it was like 5 of them together in the shipyard. We put them on a barge, float them upriver, put them in, connect them where they needed to be to create this outfall pipe. The workers were paid at the shipyard boilermaker wage rate because, well, they were in the shipyard and that's what they were called when they were working on ships. So no joining of the pipes, is plumber pipe fitter. So went up and down through the courts, and the courts came back and told us that, yeah, it's the type and nature of the work. It's not where they're located, not the physical location. It's not what the worker is called. It's the task they're doing. That is the the important thing. So that's where we got that that guidance from, and that tools, equipment, process make a difference for the correct classification. Heller versus McClure. This was an employer or employee. I was a mechanic, worked for a construction company. When equipment would break down, he would either fix it on site or fix it back in the shop. He wasn't getting prevailing wage rate for any of that. Sued the employer. He dropped the portion about the in-shop work. So the courts only looked at the on-site work. And courts came back and told us that without that mechanics knowledge, skills, abilities to fix that excavator, it couldn't do its work to further that construction project. So yes, it was covered work. His contribution furthered that public work, so that is covered work for our purposes. And this is why construction rental or equipment that's rented for construction work, if one breaks down, the rental company will bring you a new excavator, load up the broken one, take it back to their shop. If they came out and fixed it on site, they would become a subcontractor, be covered work for this. They take it back to their shop, they can fix it there. We never got guidance on, hey, is that still covered work or not? So that's why you'll see that happening. We do have a lot of tools. We know there's a lot going on with prevailing wage, a lot, you have to keep up with and everything. We've done I think a fairly good job over the last few years of making that a little easier to do. Our contractor strike and debar lists. It's again a real-time database out there you can check. PWIA dashboard. There's a warning agency portal. There's the contractor portal. You can get in there, have that bird's eye view of the family tree, basically of the contractors on that project. One time, or one-stop shop to see who's filed forms, who hasn't. You don't have to go search for each individual form. So we've done quite a bit. Still work to do, of course, but I think we've done quite a bit to help make that process go a little smoother. On our website, we've got several web pages out there. The Verified Contractor gives you that kind of one-stop shop, gives you their name, UBI number, contractor registration, industrial insurance, the training for public works projects, information on there. Our lookup wage page, talked about the information you need for that, the county, the trade, that effective date. Scope of work descriptions are out there to read. That's what we use. We get those questions, classification, take a deep dive into those. Prevailing wage policies and determinations. Those are answers from the industrial statisticians over the years to questions that have come in. We've got policies out there on travel time, when that's covered. A lot of different things out there. Those are the official answers from industrial statisticians. Alrighty. Our electronic mailing lists, if you haven't already, please sign up for these. This is our main way of communicating with with our stakeholders. You'll get updates on when prevailing wage rates are released, corrections to those, get information about the our certified payroll enforcement activities. Certainly a lot of good information out there, and this is our primary way that we communicate that. If you go to the main L&I homepage, prevailing wage is under licensing permits and then public works projects, and you can use that to get to several of our other web pages throughout site there. And we certainly encourage you to ask questions. You can send us an email at the pw1@lni.wa.gov. That is our best way to get you answers. Those answers are farmed out to several of our specialists that will get back to you with an answer. Questions coming into here, responses are called clarifications, a little term of art for us versus a determination that the industrial statistician does. But these clarifications also have the same, weight in law. If you get advice from us on something, you can depend on that's what the answer is. If you have questions about, you have a sub that says, hey, they submitted an intent form and don't know what that lousy LNI is doing with it, give us a call at this 360-902-5335. That phone is picked up by our forms processors. We've got a really good crew right there now. They can look up forms, tell you, yes, it's been submitted, it's in our queue, we just haven't got to processing it yet. If you have questions and it's something they can answer, they're more than happy to. But something they don't feel quite comfortable with, then they'll probably direct you to our pw1@lni.wa.gov. But please feel free to give them a call. This page has our specialists in the Tumwater office. Jim Christensen, of course, our program manager, industrial statistician. I got second billing here on this for some reason. But that's my email address and desk phone. The other specialists in Tumwater, bottom one, Megan Kistler, she is the supervisor of our processing team. Our processing team is one of the few entities in LNI that when you call our number, you're going to get a live body. You're going to get to talk to them. It's a really good team right now, but if they give you excellent service, let us know. If there's a problem with their service, let us know that too. We're here to help. We know we get a lot of questions about this whole prevailing wage stuff, and we're more than happy to help work through any situation that you run into. Well, now that all the pieces of this puzzle have come together, what could possibly be any questions you might have?
Chuck, one question I did have is, are we able to send these slides out to the participants today?
Yes. I'll send you a PDF version.
Okay.
And yeah, you can certainly distribute that. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, this use this as a resource. It's good. That's kind of why it's been built the way it is. So I know this goes against everything that's ever been taught about how to set up a PowerPoint presentation. But there was a method to our madness in that.
Well, and it was impressive. You said 3 hours and you finished 2 minutes ahead of schedule. It's pretty good.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a little while. We're pretty good.
Yeah, that was impressive. Well, is there any questions from anyone? If not, feel free to email me if you have some later. Chuck, I can connect them to you directly or send you any questions that may come up. And we're going to put this recording on our website, this whole presentation, and then I'll have the PDF PowerPoint if anyone needs it.
Well, thank you very much, Sophia and ABC for having us. We enjoy getting out and doing this and, helping to make sure everybody's doing what they need to do.
Yes. Well, Chuck, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it. And I know our members will appreciate this resource.
Oh, okay. You're welcome.
Great. With that, thank you everyone for joining, and feel free to email me if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Bye, folks.